always been politically active, interested in politics. It's kind of my heartbeat. I think God's wired me that way. Probably about 15 years ago, my wife and I were homeschooling our children. I picked up Michael Ferris's Constitutional Law. Michael's book was designed to basically teach how our government is supposed to work and how it's not supposed to work. And he does that by dissecting about 30 U.S. Supreme Court cases or landmark Supreme Court cases. And so for about the last 15 years, I've been teaching a year-long course on constitutional law at a homeschool high school, 10th, 11th, and 12th graders. I had the privilege of meeting Mike probably about 10 years ago at a homeschool conference. Developed a sort of a mentoring relationship, Michael to me, that is. And just Mike's one of my heroes. He's been one of the incredible advocates for conservatism and limited government for probably 30, 35 years. And certainly still homeschoolers are familiar with Michael. But anyways, that whole aspect, that whole hobby of teaching constitutional law led me into an area of teaching and offering courses. I put together a course. I teach biblical worldview in my church. Very passionate about Christians understanding their role in the culture. And so I've been teaching about the Constitution in various different seminars and things to Tea Party groups, 912 groups. And because of that, I got to be known for that in my circle of influence, if you will. And dear friend of mine, now United States Senator Tim Scott, at the time, many, many years ago, he was a county councilman. He decided to run for the United States Congress. He asked me if I would mentor him or spend some time with him teaching him Article 1, Section 8, the part of the Constitution that enumerates the powers for sitting U.S. congressmen. So we met at a Barnes & Noble every Saturday morning for about 2 hours for about 3 months. And that's kind of the individual that he is that somebody that, a humble man. He's an incredible U.S. Senator. That opportunity to mentor Tim opened up doors for me to work in other campaigns. And I've been a constitutional consultant. I've been a senior campaign advisor in a congressional campaign. I was a constitutional consultant in a U.S. senatorial campaign. Just love doing that kind of thing. Probably for about the last 3 or 4 years, began to see that that elections simply cannot fix what ails our country. Mark Levin calls it the Leviathan. Our federal government is so out of control. It's grown to such enormity, so far outside of its bounds, or what I call the fence of the Constitution, that I came to the conclusion that elections simply could not fix it. And a lot of people today are fixated on the next president or the next congressman or the next Senate. And we've seen in just recent years how both parties are, I would submit, both parties are in collusion. The federal government has grown so far out of control that it needs systemic change. And so when the Convention of States project came along, Michael Ferris called me in about September of 2013, just as this project was kicking off, and explained to me what was going on. And I'm not one to jump on political fads. I've seen conservatives work people into a frenzy, and then nothing comes of it. So I took a step back and I looked at what was being put together, and I was so impressed with the organization. I had been familiar with Article 5. I had been thinking about it some myself, read Mark Levin's book. What I saw was God's providential hand at Philadelphia in 1787, when George Mason stood up and advocated strongly for a second method of proposing amendments. In other words, for the people to be able to have a recourse if, in his words, the federal government became oppressive and abusive. I was blessed to find a lead sponsor that's a champion of this project. Bill Taylor in South Carolina, Representative Bill Taylor from Aiken, South Carolina. And quickly was able to find a legislative liaison to work with me and start building our team of district captains. And one of the things that we found out very quickly was that we were embarking not so much on passing a resolution, but on an educational effort. We found that people had no idea what we were talking about, and legislators had no idea what we were talking about. When I think about it now, and I don't say this to be disparaging of the state legislators because they have a lot on their plates. When I think about it now and I realize one of the things I tell them when we get a chance to speak to them is, do you realize that this is the one single power that the founders gave to you, state legislator, to be able to rein in and out of control federal government? So the big changes that I've seen, I would say the biggest one is that we started out with nobody knowing what we were talking about, and we realized that, you know what, we just have to step back and realize that we're in the largest educational effort dealing with our federal government in our nation's history. The other biggest thing that I've seen happen is the growth of the movement. It has just exploded across the United States of America. I've seen it here in South Carolina, but also since I worked on the national staff for 9 to 10 months, I've seen it, what has happened across the country, and it's staggering to see how people pick this up and have embraced it. One of the things that I've seen is that whenever we go out and speak, there are people that are opposed to this project. I call them the fearmongers, because that's what they're doing. They're spreading fear. It's one thing to oppose something based on a reasoned argument, but the vast majority of the opposition to the Article 5 Convention of States comes from ignorance. And I don't mean that to be an ugly term. It's just a lack of knowledge. And it's in spreading fear. And it's not a good thing to be opposed to something because of fear. And so one of the things that we've seen is that when we go out and present the full explanation, the historical background to Article 5 and what the Convention of States is doing, people come to the Convention of States project in droves. And it's not because of anything special that I'm doing or any other state director's doing or any other presenter is doing. It's because our information is truth and it's factual. It's historically accurate. And people are looking for the real solution. And it's more than just a byline when we say that the Convention of States offers a solution as big as the problem, because we face an enormous problem. I like to tell people that this is the lawful, peaceful, constitutional recourse to what they're upset about with our federal government. It's one of the things that Mark Meckler says is that we're trying to do really more than just to just pass an Article 5 resolution. We're trying to build grassroots citizens, activist citizens that will continue on and carry on to protect whatever God blesses us that we're able to do to restore our great republic into the constitutional fence, if you will. But those district captains, the volunteers that have stepped up to be district captains, to be leaders in their districts, are incredible people. I mean, they're incredible patriots. There's some people that immediately were drawn to this because they've been kind of politicos, activists for a while, but there's other people that haven't been involved. I've brought some people on, hired, if you will, quote unquote. Nobody's paid, it's all volunteer, but brought those on, and I interview everybody that wants to be a district captain, and a lot of those folks will tell me that, I've never been involved politically before. And I tell them that's not a requirement. What we're looking for is somebody that has the heart and wants to help save their country. And one of the things that we prayed about as an organization at the national level, probably over a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, was that the 2016 presidential election that the Convention of States project would overshadow the presidential election. I can't say that it's overshadowing the presidential election, but it certainly in recent weeks has catapulted into the national discussion. Some of the presidential candidates have been talking about it. Certainly, as you've mentioned, some prominent conservative voices have joined the discussion. Just yesterday in South Carolina, Congressman Jeff Duncan, one of the most astute constitutional guys. The Convention of States project has the potential to be the greatest historical event in our nation's history since the founding era. And I say that because I've been teaching and speaking on the Constitution for 15 years. It is my passion and my heartbeat. I love the United States Constitution. I'm offended when people tell me that I'm trying to destroy it, those that have fear of this, because they have no idea how much time I've put into it, to protecting it and studying original intent and teaching originalism and explaining the fallacy of the living Constitution that liberals use. Whereas we were intended, the founders told us to go back and look at their words to understand the meaning of the Constitution. So all those years that I've been speaking and teaching, people would come up to me and they would ask me, Bob, he said, after I would explain, for instance, Article 1, Section 8, the enumerated powers, that Congress only has these specified powers and they cannot tax or spend on anything outside of that. And I would lay out specifically, and in a 40-minute talk, or I do have a 12-session, a 12-hour, 12-week course that I teach. But no matter what length of session I did, I would basically lay out what the founders built and they designed, the manual to our government with a fence around a very small and limited federal government, and then we would show where we are today. And people would come up to me and they would say, well, Bob, if this is what the founders designed and this is where we are today, what can we do? And they're very discouraged. when they see the vast chasm between what was designed and where we are. In engineering terms, we would call it the delta between that. And for many years, I would tell them, well, you just need to make sure you find candidates that believe and understand what I just showed you, that have mastery of the Constitution. We shouldn't elect anybody to federal office that doesn't have some level of mastery of the governing document. And I would tell them that. And I came to the conclusion about 3 or 4 years ago that I began to be discouraged myself, that because I would see where we would elect good people and they still would do nothing, or they couldn't do anything. Some tried and couldn't do it. And I began to see that the federal government is so far out of control, as Mark Levin would call it, the Leviathan, that it's so big that some people would disagree with me. I say I'm of the belief that they cannot fix it. Some people say they just don't want to fix it. It's certainly both. Some of them don't want to, but even the ones that try to do it, it's such an enormous machine that it's so out of control they can't do it. So what the Convention of States has the potential to do is, number one, it was the process the founders gave us. That's why what I tell people that I was so attracted to it is because this is the constitutional recourse. There's a lot of folks today that have a lot of different ideas. The idea of nullification, all kinds of different ideas that are put out there. I won't go into the merits or fallacies of those things. But the fact remains, the undisputable fact is that there's only one mechanism inside the U.S. Constitution given to the states to respond to an out-of-control federal government. There's all kinds of other mechanisms in there, but there's only one single power given to the state legislatures to respond to an abusive or an out-of-control federal government. So for me as a constitutionalist, to me, there's nowhere to go. There's only one recourse. A lot of people have a lot of different ideas, and what I say is the founders gave us a process. How dare we go outside of that process to try to fix what ails our country before utilizing the process inside the Constitution? We're a nation of laws. We say that we are under the rule of law. The ultimate supreme rule of law in the United States of America is the U.S. Constitution. As a Christian, there's a higher law than that for me, but we're not a theocracy. We're a constitutional republic, and we come under the rule of law. And so for me to follow anything else, to do anything else before exercising the tool given to us in Article 5, what Madison called the second mode of Article 5, the second mode of amending the Constitution, is just flat out wrong. To me, it would be an affront to those that gave us the process. And I believe ultimately God gave us the process through fallible men. I think he put the ideas into those men to create a system of government where law was above men. You know, one of the great reformers, Samuel Rutherford, wrote a book called Lex Rex, Law is King. It was a radical concept in the mid-1600s. But our founders built a country whereas men were not law. Men came under law. So that's what really drives my passion for the Convention of States, is that we're following the rule of law. And not only just a matter of following the rule of law, when you really stop and look at it, this process right here has great potential. I even hesitate to use the word potential because I think it's stronger than that. That we can actually fix what's wrong with solid amendments. You know, your question was well, what are some of the things that can be done? I've been teaching constitutional law for a long time. Most constitutional scholars will tell you, at least those that believe in originalism, that the two most abused portions of text in the U.S. Constitution are the general welfare and the Commerce Clause. Those two portions of text have been used to create the federal monster that we have today. And certainly there are other areas. But the bottom line is that there are things that can be done, that need to be done, that could be done through the first mode, the congressional mode of amendments. But the U.S. Congress will never do things like that. They've shown that they're never going to balance the budget. They've shown that they're never going to do term limits. And we really need term limits on the U.S. Congress and on the federal courts. Things that are going to curtail their spending, like fixing or resetting the text of the Commerce Clause, they're never going to do things like that. People often ask, well, Bob, if they're not following it now, what makes you think they're going to follow it when we pass it? And that sounds like a good question on the surface, but it betrays a level of misunderstanding of what's really wrong. If you were to ask any of the 535 members of the Congress, the 100 senators, 435 House members, why aren't you following the Constitution? None of them are going to tell you they're not following it. They're going to point across the street from the U.S. Capitol to the United States Supreme Court. and they're going to say they tell us that this is constitutional. So if we're going to be honest with ourselves, we really have to turn our gaze across the street at that U.S. Supreme Court and ask ourselves, what are they doing? And what they're doing is they're operating off of a different constitution. It's a great video that we have out there in Convention of States that shows the two constitutions, the pocket constitution, the small, thin little, realize that our entire manual for our federal government fits inside one of those small, little pocket constitutions. And then there's the 3,000-page behemoth rulings and precedents. And the U.S. Supreme Court is operating off of all those precedents. And people say, well, Bob, they won't follow it if we amend it. That's simply not true. It sounds good, but it's not true. They're following, most of the modern amendments are followed to the letter because of the crystal clear language. Nobody's arguing and perverting the language of the amendment that gave women the right to vote in the 19th Amendment. That's also an argument that explains when people say, well, we don't need to amend it, there's nothing wrong with it. Well, the founders knew that they gave us an incredible document, but they knew it wasn't perfect. And we've fixed several things. We've fixed the issue of slavery with the 13th Amendment. We've fixed the issue of women not being able to vote with the 19th Amendment. Now, certainly I would argue against a couple of them, maybe the 16th and 17th Amendments I think there's problems with. But certainly there's the amendments, the modern amendments, I would say north of the 14th Amendment are being followed to the letter today. And so amendments will fix things. They will change things. If we can get amendments for term limits, the courts will follow those, just like they follow the presidential term limits amendment, the 22nd Amendment. And so we really can fix what ails our country through this process.